Right, we're on session 4 already. Session 4, causes of sinful fear. And last week we discussed the uses of each of the 3 fears that Flavel lays out in his book, Triumphing Over Sinful Fear. They were natural fear, sinful fear, and then, of course, the fear of God. That fear with which we fight fear or sinful fear. We fight sinful fear with the fear of God. That's essentially the crux of Flavel's book. Now, just by way of review, can anyone recall what some of the uses for natural fear are, or at least just one? What are some of the uses? Well, how does God use that natural fear, that which is common to us all, not necessarily sinful, although existing because of sin? The Lord Jesus Christ himself experienced this type of fear. It's a natural one. It's sort of the red alert, danger ahead. What's one of the natural, or what are one of the reasons for natural fear? There you go. Acts like a bridle, curbing our corrupt inclinations, right? It holds us back from doing that which is already by nature in our hearts by virtue of our sin. What about sinful fear? What's just one use of sinful fear that we learned about last week? God uses sinful fear as just one, as a scourge to punish his enemies. So if people are not going to fear God, Flavel says, then they're going to fear one another. He will make them, Flavel says, a terror unto themselves. In other words, if you are that persistent in not bowing the knee to God, not fearing God, God will give you what it is that you want. He will turn you over to those sinful inclinations, which just simply breed fear. He'll give you over to what it is that you want, and consequently, what happens? We end up fearing each other in sinful ways, which leads to division and disunity and so forth. What about the use of religious fear? This is the good fear. This is the optimistic fear that Flavel speaks of. What's one way in which religious fear or the fear of God is used? Keeps us on our knees, keeps us dependent, right? Keeps us confidently dependent in God. God, we are in need of you, and we know that you're going to provide for us in some way, shape, or form with even the smallest or the biggest faith, right? We know that you're going to provide for us. It also helps us to prepare for future distress. Hebrews 11:7 says, "By faith Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen," the flood hadn't come to pass, moved with godly fear, Hebrews says, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. He feared God, he trusted God, he had faith in God, and he prepared accordingly. Right? So our faith, our religious fear, as Flavel would call it, causes us to plan ahead, right? To see what's on the horizon and be prepared for what's ahead. Okay, so this week we're going to discuss causes of sinful fear. Now, this is a rather dense chapter. Has anybody gotten the book? Has anybody bothered to purchase the book? Read through it? It's coming. Oh, wow. Okay. All right. Benjamin. Okay. You may remember then that we're getting to sort of the more dense parts of the book, page-wise. I mean, this if you got the Reformed Heritage Puritan Paperbacks copy, which is edited by Beakey, this chapter is roughly about 25, 30 pages long. So it's a rather dense chapter. And in it, Flavel discusses 6 causes of sinful fear. 6 causes. Now, for time's sake, and so that we're not necessarily rushing through, although we're planning on staying, being adherent to our 6-week schedule. But this week, we're only going to get through the first 2 out of 6 this morning. And then the remaining 4, we're going to address next week, along with also the effects of sinful fear. So this week, in the beginning of next, we're going to talk about the causes of sinful fear. What prompts sinful fear? Can we attribute sinful fear to? And then along with the effects, cause and effect, not necessarily complicated. And so the first cause of sinful fear, Flavel says, is ignorance. Ignorance. Simply not knowing or not availing ourselves of knowledge. Now, Flavel says this: the sinful fear of most good people, it's interesting, remember, just because you might experience this sort of thing doesn't mean that you're on the unrighteous side, doesn't mean that you're not justified, right? It just means that you're a sinner, right? So the sinful fear of most good people arises from their ignorance, their darkness of mind, of their minds. All darkness inclines to fear, but none like intellectual darkness. If our judgment is properly instructed, our hearts will be peace. Now, when Flavel speaks of intellectual darkness, he's not talking about going out and getting 17 advanced degrees in order to be able to understand our sinful hearts and God's ways. That's not what he's necessarily referring to. If that were the case, then no one without an advanced degree could understand these concepts, but that's clearly not the case. What Flavel is saying is you're not thinking, right? You're not read up, in a sense, on the subject, or you're not thinking properly, even through the discerning of your own heart, your own life, your own situations. I'm jumping ahead. We'll get to that in a second. So if our judgment is properly instructed, our hearts will be at peace. Have you ever feared something where maybe you haven't gotten all the data, and then when you find out more about it, or remember something perhaps you had forgotten, and then you're like, okay, I think I'm good. Your fear levels then begin to subside. Why? Because knowledge has been brought in, whether it's a remembrance of already existing knowledge, something you've been told before, or it's simply new knowledge imparted. Your fear levels begin to subside. In many cases, the more that we learn about something, the less fearful we are. I think a good example of this, there's, from a biblical perspective, there's a close correlation between fear and anger, for instance. Okay, if you're ever interested in reading up more on this correlation, David Powlison writes a good book called Good and Angry, great book, and he talks about the correlation between these two. He talks about how in the Proverbs, it says that essentially anger springs forth from the heart of a fool, right? Not only from someone who doesn't fear God, but someone who is ignorant of God, isn't aware of his word. And if you stop and think about it, stop and think about your own lives, we tend to be the most frustrated, the most angry, and therefore the most fearful in some cases because we don't know enough, right? Now, I'm not saying go out and know everything, right? But I think if we, the aim of this book is to get us to understand our hearts a little bit more and stop and ask ourselves the self-reflecting question, okay, if I'm upset or I'm frustrated about something, have I stopped and have I thought about it, right? Have I brought in more knowledge? Am I remembering that which I've already been given, whether it comes from a friend, whether that knowledge comes from something you've read in a quiet time or a devotion, whether it comes from the pulpit, whether it comes from something your mama told you 20 years ago, right? Knowledge is key. Now then, Flavel goes a little bit deeper into this and talks about 5 types, 5 types of ignorance. What a surgeon, what a meticulous mind. He talks about an ignorance of God as the first ignorance. He speaks of a lack of full consideration of God as a type of ignorance which can lead to sinful fear. He says, if we thoroughly understand and believe what power is in God's hand to defend us, what tenderness is in his heart to help us, and what faithfulness is in his promises, our hearts will be calm. Our courage will grow stronger, and our fear will grow weaker. Now, how might we expand our understanding of God to this end? What are some concrete ways that we might do this, that we might expand our knowledge of God? Don't overthink this. What's that? Yeah, Bible study. Okay, great. Let's put a pin in that one because I do want to come back to the second word that you said there. Okay. What else? Benjamin.
A lot of it just comes down to simple like prayer and walking in faith.
Mm-hmm.
Like actually taking what we know and translating it into our
Right.
experiences.
Right. Yeah. So, Lord, help me to apply that which I've learned. Right?
when you learn on the character and nature of God. We like studying Christ. We like learning about our Savior and our salvation. We don't look too much into the character of God. We don't spend time in our minds ruminating on it so that it can sink and settle in all the way down into our bones.
Mhm.
We touch on learning about it. It tends to be something like here and something like there. It wasn't that neat to learn about, but we don't spend nearly as much time to learn God as we do learning about Jesus.
Okay. That in and of itself is enough to think about. I have a follow-up question, Kathy. You got a good book for that?
Stephen Charnock.
Oh, that's a thin one.
Yeah, it's only 2 volumes. It's 9 pages. But no, it seems daunting, but there is so much to the character and nature of God. The Ligonier series that we did, the pastor that had, you know, like 16 different characteristics of God. And that's 5 minutes each video to sit down, and that gives you so much to then sit there and think about it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So Charnock, yeah, that's a good one. That's a tome. Yeah, fantastic. And I like the Ligonier series as well. Palatable, 25 minutes is digestible. Yeah. There's also a book. I thought this is what you were going to say in one, and it's probably in your head too. Who's heard of Thomas Watson? Another Puritan dude. He writes a little treatise called Meditation, A Christian on the Mount. And I have it, I think I have it in my office, but it's a smaller one. And it's just structure. The idea behind it is that sort of, I've said this on multiple occasions, Luther's quote about, turning over every leaf, right? Squeezing all of the juice that there is to squeeze out of the scriptures. Watson, it's almost a daily devotional in a sense. One particular topic, right, to think deeply about. So take 1 or 2 verses, turn them over in your minds, right? Study them, right? Paul says to Timothy, study to show thyself approved. Now, I think that's particularly, doubly applicable to the pastor, to elders, to study, right? To look deeper, get the thera of the text, if you will, the deeper spiritual meaning that lies within the text. But it's also something that, I mean, come on, God is gracious, guys. I put this in my sermon today, but what's really happening when we read the Bible? When we read the Bible, what's really happening there? The Bible's reading us, right? The Bible is reading us. And so even if we're taking just 1 or 2 verses, right, of meditation, right, do we believe that God's word is living and active? Do we believe that even its reading just cuts, pierces, right, divides to the deepest? There you go, separation of bone and sinew, right? Cuts in the finest of places. The Spirit, through His Word, is reading our hearts. And so we can take just 1 or 2 verses, and if we're chewing on those things enough, if we're prayerfully considering it, Lord, I want to understand, I don't understand, help me to understand, search my heart, try me, reveal my hidden secrets, reveal my hidden fears. God's a good God. He's a gracious God. He's desirous to do that. Now He's going to do it in His own way, in His own time. He's going to do it, right? So my point is, I took that beyond where Flavel took it, but my point is that if we just avail ourselves in simple study of small passages, right, we will become enamored with God, right? We're going to marvel over just 1 or 2 verses. And it doesn't take an advanced degree, in a sense, to do that. And you're talking to, this is somebody coming to you with an advanced degree, right? God is faithful to do those things. And so the second thing that Flavel talks about is not just an ignorance of God. He talks about an ignorance of others. We fear people, Flavel says, because we do not know them. If we were to understand them better, we would fear them less. We overvalue them. Therefore, we fear them. Apparently, the artist often paints the lion fiercer than he is. I love how the Puritans do that, right? Such a really, 5 words and beautiful analogy, illustration. I am sure our imagination paints people more dreadful than they are. Our imaginations are tainted by sin. We can come up with some whoppers, right? How do we dispel those imaginations? Well, sort of in 2 ways. One, we can read what the Bible says about man, right? And that's kind of what Flavel, I think, is directly getting at. Look, if you want to know more about man, read the Bible and then compare what God says about man to what God says about himself. Who's bigger? Who has more impact? Who's more powerful? We give people an awful lot of credit in our minds. And I don't hear me saying like we all stink, right? We're all awful. I think that's contrary to the love of God, which teaches us, yeah, hey, all of y'all are awful, but guess what? My redeeming grace gives you to treat each other well, to give each other benefit of the doubt, right? Like that's, I'm not saying we're awful people. I'm just saying that we attribute too much power, right, to men. This is our society. It dresses, just to be blunt, it dresses it all up in this facade of just like, we are wonderful and everybody's smiling, but subconsciously what's happening there is saying, look at man, constantly, right? Humanity is not in a better place. It doesn't go to any positive places in perpetuating the importance of man, aside from the fact that we bear the image of God. That's why we're important. That's why I want to be known for something, because I reflect the good king, right? Not in and of ourselves. We give each other way too much credit. But I think on more of a practical level, I think there's some truth here as well, on an individual level, in our local settings, right? Whether it be here, whether it be at work, whether it be our family. How might we be able to better understand people in the individual and specific? Not just that like ontological, generic. So ontological, God says this is who we are by nature, right? That's all true of all of us. But in the individual and specific, how might we go about that? Did you say just die while talking? Oh, dialogue. Yeah. I was like, wow. Okay. Just dialogue. And what is a component of dialogue? Let's say if we were to break down, here's what dialogue is.
Both communication both ways.
Okay. And, okay. Spending time, relationship. But give me the nuts and bolts of relationship. What does that sound like? Oh, there's a grammatical thing I'm looking for, a type, but I can't. I'm just going to tell you, okay? Asking questions. And asking good questions. Asking the right questions, or just asking genuine questions. Maybe they first might sound a little stupid, but at least we're asking questions, right? And this is something that's emphasized again over and over in counseling as a way to get a good, firm idea about what's really going on with a person, right? What's really going on inside of their heart. How many times have you just, had a particular perception of someone, right? And then you got to know them a little bit better, and then you get to learn more about them. Maybe they're sharing it, but maybe they're sharing it via the questions that you ask them. I'm not saying the only way to get to know people is questions. You don't have to actually ask a question, but that's just one way to do it, right? And then you're like, hey, hold on. I didn't know that about this person. You find it out, and you're like, okay, that's a horse of a different color, right? That's a horse of a different color. To be able to effectively get to encourage one another. We always say here, stir one another up to love and good works, and that's right. But we have to know how to stir, right? Benjamin's different than Stephen's, different than Eric, different than Kathy. There's different things for different people with different stories. How are you going to encourage each other if you don't know where they need encouraged or how they need encouraged? The only way to do that is to ask questions, and ask good questions. Helps put one another in perspective, and will also to help one another fear one another a lot less. right? Beware too, because there is a proclivity inside of us that sometimes, this is not in every case, but in sometimes we might withdraw from wanting to get to know one another because we have our own opinions that we want to hold on to. It's more comfortable for us to think whatever it is inside of our heads because somehow we think that we know we've got it all figured out, right? I don't know about you, but the older I get, the more I realize I don't have anything figured out. I don't know how about you, the older I get, the more I realize that life doesn't make sense, but God does. I know that much, right? Be careful. We want to, by our own pride, whether it's dressed up in ignorance or obstinate, right? I am right on this. Most often we're not. I hate to tell you that. Most often we are not. And the only way to validate that is to continue to get to know people, right? All right. Thirdly, we're ignorant of ourselves. Ignorant of ourselves. In this respect, Flavel speaks specifically of God's concern for his own. Okay, that's the context. Flavel says, if we were to understand how dear we are to God, our relation to him, our value in his eyes, and how he protects us by his faithful promises and gracious presence, we would not tremble at every appearance of danger. We wouldn't tremble at every appearance of danger. Let me ask you a question. Do you know how dear you are to God? You know how dear you are to God. Do you know that? Despite our fearing, our anxieties, our unbelief, the myriads of other sins that we commit, we're still precious to the Father. Do we believe this? Do we believe this? If we believed that we were that precious to God, why would we fear? Why would we fear? God, who's more powerful than man, far more powerful than man, can change the most maliciously directed heart in an instant, melt it by his grace, redirect it effortlessly because he's vindictively, in a sense, protective of you as his child. Do we believe that? Now, how might we exercise ourselves in becoming more assured of the Father's care for us? We're speaking, you can tell, very concretely in an application terms this morning. How might we exercise ourselves and become more assured of the Father's care for us? In some ways, we sort of already discussed this, but maybe let's go in a little bit further.
A lot of time thinking over things that go wrong, or things that we wish would have gone better, or periods in our life that we were afraid to avoid those. How much time do we actually spend ruminating on the good things that God does? Moments where we felt that assurance, not just intellectually, you said God is taking care of you, but when it truly pierces our heart and we feel it, we can invest in it. We don't spend a lot of time recalling all of it.
Yeah. The book of Philippians chapter 4, take a look at it, right? Has a lot of, basically, Kathy just paraphrased it, right? Philippians 4, 8 or 9, look around that. Whatever's true, whatever is right, whatever is honorable, whatever is good, whatever is noble, whatever is just, something. Think on these things and the peace of God, right? Connection with the peace of God, which passes all understanding, and what it is that we're dwelling upon. Jenna.
In my journey, me being more honest with myself about my sin, about my issues.
Yeah.
It allows for that love to come in. I didn't understand God's love for a long time because I wasn't being honest with myself or him about it. And then I was like, oh, this is what that feels like? Because I was actually honest with myself. And so that allowed me to actually experience that was a really big point of mine because everybody talks about the love of God as this like mythical thing, but I never experienced it. But it was through maturity of getting to my sin that brought it.
Yeah, that's right. Amen. Lucas, were you going to say something? Okay. I thought you were like, all right. Yeah, Benjamin.
Just another Puritan curl on that. I always say, sin must be bitter before Christ can be sweet.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Boy, you could go off on a whole, I want to say, a societal / humanitarian rant, because I believe this has been true since the fall. But We don't want to be offended nowadays, do we? We can feel free to offend others, right? But we don't want to be offended, right? Nothing's more offensive than the gospel, right? And the front end of the gospel is you're a sinner, right? And then if you say, well, what does that mean? What does that entail? What do the 10 Commandments, what are they actually teaching? Right? And you don't even have to go to the Westminster Larger Catechism to understand that, right? You can just go to the New Testament and look at Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. You mean I've killed someone when I've hated them? Right? I've committed adultery when I've lusted. These are worth hell. These are worth fire, right? And it starts to pierce you. It starts to hit you, right? But boy, how relentless God is in having that truth and desiring that truth be preached, not to kill you, but to actually save you in the final analysis, right? To make Christ so sweet, right? Only after you've been made to see how bitter your own heart actually is, right? From God's perspective. Okay. One more thing I was going to go through. If you're wrestling with this idea of being assured of the Father's care for us, read things like Romans chapter 8. That's helpful. Read the book of 1 John, right? How do I know if I love the Father, right? Here are some I obey his commands. So I obey his commands, not perfectly, no, but I do, right? But John also says here, this is love, right? Not that we love God, but that God first loved us. So when we're seeking and striving after his commands to obey them, that's actually a sign that God loves us in a way, right? There's assurance there. You are dear to him. You're dear to him. All right. Let me see. Just from a time perspective, I'm just going to go ahead and skip over to 3b. There are some examples if you want to go back and read some biblical examples and some historical examples of what Flavel's talking about. But, ignorant in terms of kind of, maybe in a sense slipping into a remedy of ignorance of ourselves, Flavel says, if only we could, without pride and vanity, value ourselves according to our Christian dignities and privileges. If ever it is necessary to count them, it is in times of fear and danger, when the heart is so prone to dejection and sinking fears. Now, I'll just jump back up and actually use the historical example. An early writer by the name of Tertullian said this, and it's true, irrespective of what he says. Are you afraid of a man, Christian, when devils are afraid of you? We often don't think that way, do we? Right? Now, why do devils fear the Christian? Why do demons fear the Christian? Well, is an attack on the Christian an attack on the Christian, or is it really an attack on Christ? Yeah, right. They fear the Christian because of who's behind the Christian, right? They just get at the Christian to get at the Christ behind the Christian, if you will. But nonetheless, it's still true. We are in Christ. We are in union with Christ. We're united to him by faith. Right? What have we to fear when everybody else, in a sense, is afraid of us? Even though we don't know it half the time, right? We feel more afraid of people than people. So this Flavel said, man, if we could only remember that, we might ease up a little bit on our fears. Okay, fourthly, Flavel talks about an ignorance of circumstances. Often all that is real to us is what we can see, right? We're sensual people, right? So Flavel says we mistake our dangers and troubles, hence we fear them. In particular, we are ignorant of the comforts in them and the escapes from them. There's a vast difference between trouble's outward appearance and inward reality. From a distance, it is a lion, but when we open it, we discover honey in its belly. So he gives the biblical example of Paul and Silas singing in prison, right? Remember the story of the Philippian jailer, right? They're imprisoned, start to sing hymns and psalms, right? The doors busted open, and somebody ends up getting saved, right? You think this, Paul and Silas are jailed, that's the end of them. They're being persecuted, somebody's salvation comes out of it, right? He also gives the example of the captive exiles in Isaiah. Flavel says, the poor captive exiles expected to die, That's, again, remember, going back to the beginning, the context, the biblical context here that Flavel is referring to is captivity of the Israelites or of Judah. And therefore, they made their graves in the land of their captivity. They could only think of the usual methods of deliverance, power or payment. Either I'm going to say to this oppressive king, hey, let me strike a deal with you so I can get out of here, right? Or let me strike a deal with somebody else who's going to come and trample your head, right? So that I can get out of here. Flavel goes on to say, they never dreamed, so it wasn't a thought of theirs for a second, of God's immediate influences upon the king's heart to make him release them, contrary to all rules of state policy. In other words, it's like, oh, we say that God directs the hearts of kings, but they kind of forgot that, right? When you're in the midst of trial, when you're in the midst of fears. Again, God effortlessly directs all of our hearts by his providence. But we sit there and think, I've got to do this. I've got to, make an alliance here to defeat my enemy there. I got to pay my enemy off somehow, or I got to do all these things. Maybe we have to do those things sometimes. Sometimes there's a place for wisdom and prudence and all of that. We got to be shrewd, that's for sure. But God doesn't need our help, right? He doesn't need our help. So God's always working in the unseen. He directs the hearts of men, and he's always going to direct them for our good. Period. Full stop. No exceptions. Lastly, ignorant of the covenant of grace. Flavel says, if we were better acquainted with the nature, extent, and stability of this covenant, our hearts would be free from these tormenting passions. What is the covenant of grace? Or people who may not be familiar with that. What is that? You don't have to put it in catechetical terms if you don't want to, but just generally speaking. Right.
It is our salvation.
That's right. I've loved you since from before all time. I'm going to show that love by reaching into human history and redeeming you back to myself, and nobody's ever going to stop that. And you're always going to be mine. Right? It's the covenant of grace. There's Westminsterian language for that. If you want to look it up, it's question and answer 20. If you also, again, I feel like a bibliography here giving you additional works. John Murray writes a nice, succinct treatise on the covenant of grace. I have that one in my office too. So if you're interested in reading that, take a look. I guess it's somewhat cursory in a sense, but it's John Murray, so his cursory is like what we would write in, 17 chapters or something, right? Okay. Any questions? We're going to move on or try to move on to that second cause of sinful fear. But any questions or comments in respect to ignorance, Jenna?
Or the ignorance, I don't know, like we were talking about, like pursuing the Bible and like going through the Bible to find out more. What would you offer somebody who is like reading the Bible and it feels like nothing's resonating, nothing is impactful? I feel like I've been through that. I don't know if, like, as a pastor, what you would offer that person, or if it's probably different.
Yeah, it's funny because it's a great question. I think off the top of my head, there's almost something where I want to say is, did you read this psalm, right? Or did you read that psalm, right? Because you're probably better with the numbers, Benjamin, than I am, right? But your prayers are hitting the ceiling. Nothing's coming out of this, right? I'm not sensing you. I'm not feeling you, God. I think there's at least 3 or 4 psalms I can think of in content, but not number, right off the top of that. So I'd say, did you read that? And not to push back and say, well, go read harder. It's to say, I'm convinced and I've been there, right? That I'm not going to let you go, God. It's Jacob wrestling with God, right? Jacob was a deceiver, but he was also exceptionally stubborn, and his stubbornness worked out well, right? He wrestled with God. I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. Keep talking to God. That's one thing. I think the second thing I would say is keep thanking God. It could be oftentimes that sometimes we're tending to search for an experience with God, although we should have that, right? But it's a question of, what do you mean by experience? Are you searching for a liver quiver, right? I heard one pastor say, right? You're searching for, I get the jitteries for Jesus today, right? Like, I don't even see that in the Bible for the most part, right? So questioning, okay, what is it that we're asking of God, right? I've been in situations where I've thought, Lord, I want this, Lord, I need this, Lord, and it all sounded great. But my posture and disposition only changed when I thanked God for where I was in that day. And what that showed me is that God was reading my heart, sort of saying, you don't know what you're asking, right? You're asking this, but you need this. I've said this oftentimes. How many times did Jesus use that form of dialogue in the Bible? People come to him thinking they're asking one thing. Jesus says, let me tunnel. Let me tunnel. Let me get to the issue that's there. And for me, oftentimes it's thankfulness. You don't have this, but thank God for whatever it is in the day, right? Lord, I'm sad. Lord, I'm crushed. Lord, but I thank you because you're my Lord, right? Sometimes, all the time, not sometimes, all the time in the midst of trial, God is constantly stretching us. He's a stretching God, right? He's teaching us in that particular instance, I'm teaching you to thank me more, right? Not because I need your thanks, but because you need to see that the contentment of your heart depends upon developing the ability to thank God, right? And not, I don't feel like I'm going to thank it. It's not an issue of feeling, which would lead to my third point. I feel like I'm just preaching a sermon now, which would lead to the third point. We live in an incredibly emotionalistic society. Okay? Now, I'm not saying emotions are bad. Don't hear me saying that. I've said 1,000 times, what is our heart? It's the intellect, emotion, and will. Unite my heart to fear your name. All of the components of my soul include how I think, how I feel, and how I behave, right? From that thinking and feeling. That's not what I'm saying. Read the Psalms. Is it sinful for these people to be having emotions? No, that's why God writes the Psalms, to teach you how to process your emotion. But he teaches you how to process your emotion with faith by doctrine, by knowledge, right? So there's a sense in which we say, okay, I'm not downing that emotion at all. I think that's huge. Jesus wept. He got angry, right? But at the same time, if we're looking to God to be our happy pill, he will be our happy pill in a sense, but it's going to taste a lot different than the happy pill that we're probably searching for. God isn't a replacement psychedelic, right? If that makes any sense at all, okay? So I do believe that it's our intellect, again, the ability to think, not our IQ, okay, that drives the train. That's why the Bible's a book, right? It has words. For whatever reason, God made it that way. I'm going to reveal myself to you in a book, right? In and of itself, that should tell you that what needs to drive the train, in a sense, is not how we feel, but how we think. Emotions may or may not follow, okay? Now, if you are talking about, Lord, I need your presence, right? It is also possible to say, well, Lord, examine me and search me. Because if there is sin, right, that's in my life, disobedience somehow, or ignorance of doctrine, right? Ignorance of how, then search me and point that out. And always say this. I always, almost always, end my prayers with this. Ask God and then say, give me to wait upon you. I have this little sign on my desk that says, pray, trust, wait. Is that right? Pray, trust, wait, or pray, wait, trust. I think it's pray, wait, and trust, maybe. But pray, Lord, you're going to answer this in your time because you're good. And I will move forward, right? I will go forward. You got to be kind of stubborn about it. Right? Make sense? Okay, hope that was helpful. Thanks for keeping me sharp, Jen. I appreciate it. Okay, any other questions or comments on ignorance before we move ahead to guilt? Okay. So the second cause of sinful fear, Flavel says, is guilt. He says, a servant of sin is necessarily a slave of fear. Those who commit evil must expect evil. As soon as Adam defiled and wounded his conscience with guilt, he trembled and hid himself. So some descriptions and examples of this. He goes on to say that this guilt-laden person doesn't know where to find security. He dares not trust in any promises of protection. He doubts. He's jealous of everything. He suffers the effects of real and imaginary dangers. His troubled imagination scares him, even when there is no real danger. So this is, in proverbial, or the terms of the Proverbs 28:1, the wicked flee when no man pursueth, but the righteous are as bold as lions, right? I would imagine on some level we all suffer the effects of fearing both those things which are real and imaginary. I think that's, we already established that's true. But Flavel here is speaking of someone who is sort of perpetually preoccupied with these dangers. It's an entire mindset for them. They're tortured by these imaginations constantly, and this is a sad sight. I would say it's a sad sight. I had two people in my life, over the course of my life, who, and close to me as well, who were just incessantly always on guard, incessantly. One was more at the individual level, always looking sideways at someone, suspicious all the time, not inquisitive, not cautious, not skeptical, suspicious. Always this guy was watching his back, always surveying the room, looking for the one who was out to get him. And then there was another guy whom I was ministering to who was just preoccupied with this distant and unnamed force, this entity that was somehow conspiring against him and against all of us. And one, I was like, okay, yeah, I'm sure that's true. And behind it all is probably Satan. That's not a shocker to me. But this was more personal. And what I found in peculiar, this is my observation in both cases, was that the people in their immediate proximity, the people who surrounded them, were great people, were decent people, people who actually liked, cared for, and even loved them. I found myself often thinking, who are these people that you're talking about, this entity? And where is this entity out to get you? Maybe you're seeing something I'm not. I remember thinking for these, like, maybe I'm missing something here. Maybe I don't get it. Maybe I'm ignorant. Maybe I'm stupid, naive, whatever. Now, I've come to believe that what they had been suffering with all along was simply guilty conscience. Neither understood the gospel, right? That's different from somebody who struggles with these things but understands the gospel. Remember, we talked about the relief that we receive on an ongoing basis. God is gracious to us in that. And it's sad to see this. It's heartbreaking, actually. Again, and we alluded to this last week, we all, as believers, can experience a taste of these things, but God gives us graces to deal with them and preserve and temper them. Again, imagine not having that. Imagine not having that preservation and that temperance and that warmth and comfort that comes with being able to flee to Christ as a refuge, even when we're lost in our sinful fears. He's not wearing wrath on his brow for us, is he? And we feel that. Now, a quick, here's another, boy, I'm giving a lot of books out here today, huh? So a quick book plug here. If you're interested in studying this type of thinking, right, whether to better witness to other folks that may not apply the gospel to themselves, or whether you yourself are struggling with it or want to read up more on it, there's a good pamphlet called Suspicion, How to Overcome Paranoid Thinking. It's by a guy named Lou Priolo. He's big in the counseling world. He does solid work in biblical counseling. He's written a few books which have been very helpful to me, both ministerially and personally, over the years. So I'd highly recommend that to you as well. Now, Flavel goes on to give examples of this. Again, as I said in the congregational meeting last week, we're trying to focus in on history, make church history, in a sense, or history a part of our preaching and our teaching and I guess even praying too as well. Two examples from church history, although they aren't exactly within the church, but these people did affect the church. Charles X, King Charles X, and King Richard III. Flavel tells the story of Charles X, who was the king of France, and he talks about his bloody and barbarous massacre of Protestants. And it's reported that afterwards, not Charles X, Charles IX, that Charles could neither wake or sleep without music to divert his thoughts. And this is an interesting parallel. Flavel doesn't talk about this, but I'm just saying it's an interesting parallel with him and King Saul. What did Saul need to soothe him at times? What's that? Yeah. David, play me a ditty, right? I kind of soothes my soul a little bit. It was David's harp. The guy, he's trying to kill him one moment and say, come, play me some soothing music the next. That's in 1 Samuel 16:23. If you want to go ahead and read that, I think I may have placed it on your outline. The second example he gives is Richard III, who, after murdering his two innocent nephews, saw shapes like devils pulling at him in his sleep. Again, I don't know much about the history of Richard III. I always look at you, Benjamin. I'm sorry if I do that. I just assume you know everything about history all the time, especially English history.
Richard III is one of Shakespeare's best tragedies.
Okay. So this is accurate then, probably is what you're saying. Okay. Again, was he a believer or not? Yeah. Yeah, so he's not a believer, he's awful. Was Martin Luther a believer? Go ahead.
Richard III was the last English king to die in battle.
Okay. Did you hear that? Richard was the last king to die in battle, and he deserved it, Benjamin says. Now, yeah. Lucas, let's not post this, okay?
He is the edge of the War of the Roses. He kind of arranges the deaths of his nephews, to become the king, and then Henry VII, Tudor, comes up. That's the story shaker for one.
Go, Richard. All right. I'll let it die there for recording purposes. But again, keeping this train in mind, okay, believers have sinful natures that we wrestle with, and sinful fear is a part of this as well, which is why Flavel's writing it. To who else, allegedly saw devils? Who threw inkwells at devils? Huh?
Luther.
Yeah, Luther. Seems like Luther was a Christian to me. I think that's the case. He struggled greatly. Now, it's debatable as to whether or not he's actually seen devils or what is this, but at the least, at the minimum, you say, okay, well, even if he's not physiologically seeing the shapes of these things, we can certainly, believe that Satan is a formidable foe, especially for such a one as God was using as Martin Luther at the time. All right. So manifestations of what this looks like, this sort of sinful fear that's driven by guilt. It aggravates small matters, blowing them up to the height of the most fatal and destructive evils. Cain cries, "Everyone that findeth me shall slay me," Genesis 4:14. Every child becomes a giant in his sight, and everyone he met becomes a threat. It interprets all doubtful cases in the worst possible sense, Flavel says. So something that is unsure, still needing to be weighed, or the outcome is indeterminate at the present, it's a doomsday scenario. Forget about it. It creates fears and terrors out of nothing. Flavel says, in arithmetic, many zeros make zero. The rules of fear, however, are not like that. It can make something out of nothing, many and great things out of nothing at all. Many and great things out of nothing at all. Can anybody identify with any of this on any level? You ever blow things out of proportion? You just, like, what? I mean, I'm reading through this and I'm like, okay, well, I need to examine my own heart, right? To see if what about, that's it. It's over. It's over. I'm done.
Yeah, just go search any ache or pain, and you're pretty much dead.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Google it. Yeah, Wyatt. That's how who? Okay, I don't tell us. I don't know anything about that.
I don't like that. He was a guy who basically he is most famous probably for saying
Okay. All right. Yeah. So the internet feeds these things, right? Good old Alex wasn't helpful there at all. We can relate, and so and this kind of leads in sort of the end of the lesson. His understanding, Flavel talks about two objections to this idea of, okay, well, if you're experiencing these types of things, like, you know, I mean, are you not saved, right? Are you not justified? Because we all just said, hey, I blow this out of proportion, I blow that out of proportion. You know, I meet the specs of some of these things. Um, and so Flavel addresses two things here. He says, look, not all of this, though, is always attributed to an unbelieving or a guilty conscience. Not all of it is always about sin all the time if you have these experiences, okay? He says, he attributes part of it to a constitution, right? I think I've talked about that before. A bodily constitution, what we would think of as physiological makeups or dynamics, okay? Flavel says it is the affliction and unhappiness of many pardoned and gracious souls, Christians, to be united with diseased bodies that afflict them from within. They wound them by their own diseases and infections. These wounds cannot be cured and prevented by reason or religion any more than bodily diseases can be cured by such things. This is a sore affliction for many good people whose consciences are sprinkled with Christ's blood. God sees fit to burden them with such affliction for their humiliation. Humiliation meaning not like, hey, I want to embarrass you here, right? To keep you humble, to keep you dependent upon God, to keep you happy in the final analysis. Because you keep dependent on yourself, good luck with finding happiness, right? Now I'm going to keep you dependent on me, says the Lord. And then also for the prevention of greater evil, right? So it's a thorn in the flesh. The bodily condition is a thorn in the flesh. I mean, think about people that just a most basic example, and I'll just use myself here. I've had chronic back pain for at least as long as Julie and I have been married, right? If not, 10 years before that. And it's such to the point sometimes where it's just shooting right up and down my neck and my spine and my arms. And I can feel myself becoming more irritable and more stressed out, right? And it's over the smallest thing. Or you take the imagination, take your imagination, that one thought that pops in your head and you can't control it, right? Because of that physiological disposition. Now, I will go for a run, drink more water, stretch, get a massage, whatever, right? Go to the chiropractor and it's alleviated. But some people have these problems chronically, right? Chronic dementia, chronic vascular issues, right? Where it just exacerbates that. I say that in part because let's not run around going, I don't know if you're a Christian, because you sound a little bit crazy from time to time, okay? I mean, we can church. Look at the Church of Corinth. You think there's got to be some crazy people there, right? But also for yourselves, okay? God is on your side. Flavel's not going to say in one breath, hey, one of the causes here is because we don't realize how much we're loved by God and how tender He is towards us. And then the other side say, well, admission to the kingdom is not have any panicky thoughts, So it's important to know that. Now, on the other side of the coin, he does, and we'll end with this. There are other people who object, and they rightfully observe. There are many bold and daring sinners who, despite their guilty conscience, look danger in the face without trembling. So what's up with that, right? How can people be so bold, but yet they're horrible, right? Have done atrocious things. And Flavel says it's a spiritual judgment upon the hearts and consciences of such people, whereby they're hardened and seared with a hot iron. And so as a result, the conscience no longer functions as it ought, right? You have many people throughout history, many kings who have taken so much life that they just get used to it. And they see they're doing quite well with it. So they're just going to keep on keeping on, right? The more you do something, the more hardened you become to it, right? The more you do the right things, the more sensitive you become to doing the wrong things. So I want to close by having us consider, take this away with you if you're looking for something to ponder and think about. Just think about how this ignorance and this guilty conscience might interact with one another experientially. How might our ignorance contribute or feed into the fears of a guilty conscience? Let me give you a super helpful example, right? I'm just, tortured all the time by my past, okay? Well, go and meditate on the covenant of grace, right? So the guilt, the fear that comes from guilt of not having your sins redeemed, right, or your soul redeemed, go back, right, and study the covenant of grace. That might be a good thing for you. So thinking along those lines. I'm not going to grade you on your homework assignment. I'm not going to I'm going to grade, so I expect it highly from you. But just something, if you're looking for something concrete to take away and kind of ponder, meditate on throughout the week, think about how those two things interact. Your outlines hopefully should help you to do that. So, any departing comments, questions? All right, Benjamin, would you go ahead and pray for us, please?